Our webinar for public health guidance for downtown businesses and organizations. My name is Julie Ingram, and I'm the manager of environmental health with Peterborough Public Health. And with me today is Janet Dawson.
Hello, everybody. My name is Janet Dawson. I'm a health promoter with Peterborough Public Health.
Thanks so much for tuning in and listening to our webinar, and we'll just get right into it. So I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that Peterborough Public Health is located on the Treaty 20 Michi-Saagiig territory and in the traditional territory of the Michi-Saagiig and Chippewa First Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. Peterborough Public Health respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaties First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and water in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. We are all treaty people. And as I sit here on this gorgeous May 22nd day, I'm looking out my window and seeing the trees all with their full green leaves on it and flowers starting to bloom, and it's warm, and I know later this afternoon I'm going to feel the sun on my face, so I'm just feeling very grateful for this weather that we're having today. Just to start with a little bit of disclosure for this presentation, the intended audience for this recording is for businesses and organizations that are primarily located in the City of Peterborough's downtown core, and it's to provide public health measures related to those businesses and organizations as the downtown core undergoes some modifications for the spring and the summer. The presentation has been prepared and recorded based on the most current information that we have. So that's up to today's date, May 22nd. But as you all know, the COVID rules and restrictions change quite frequently. So please keep an eye on provincial announcements as well as our website for more updated information. The presentation is only intended to provide education, and it does not constitute legal advice. So it's up to you to get your own legal opinions on interpretation of the legislation. And to know what legislation's in effect, please review the orders that are currently in force under the Reopening Ontario Act. We will provide a link in the resources at the end of this presentation. In addition, there are times that Peterborough Public Health has letters of instruction to businesses. If there's a conflict between the letters of instruction and the provincial legislation, then we urge you to go with whichever is most restrictive. So today we're going to cover a few things. We're just going to start with a quick overview of COVID-19 transmission, as well as the new reopening plan for the province of Ontario that was recently announced. We will briefly touch on the regulations that are in force under the Reopening Ontario Act and Peterborough Public Health orders and instructions. We're going to talk about public health measures for all businesses and organizations, and then those that are specific to the downtown core. And then we'll review a few slides that have lots of different resources on them for you. So just a little bit about COVID-19. We've been living this for well over a year now, but it's always a good reminder to know how it spread. And COVID-19 is mainly spread person to person through respiratory droplets of somebody that's infected with the virus. Respiratory droplets can be emitted when a person coughs or sneezes, something like that, even when they're speaking. And they can travel typically up to 2 meters or about 6 feet. And also, you can also acquire the virus if you touch something that an infected person has touched, and then you proceed to touch your mouth or your eyes or your nose. Some factors that increase the risk of transmission are close contact with people, closed spaces, crowded places, and forceful exhalation. So singing and talking loudly. Also, when you're exercising, you're breathing a lot heavier. We know that those factors are associated with an increased risk of transmission of COVID-19. In addition, we know now that there's new variants of COVID-19 circulating, and these variants have been shown to cause increased disease spread and severity of symptoms. We are seeing these variants in the Peterborough area, so it's important that we stay diligent in our fight against COVID-19. In order to prevent COVID-19, it really does take a hierarchy of controls. We have to take a layered approach. It's not a one size fits all approach. It does depend on the setting, but the bottom line is that there's multiple control measures that you need to implement. So these are things like, first and foremost, physical distancing. Physical distancing and staying out of another's range of droplet emission is one of the best ways to protect yourself against COVID-19. So, keeping that 2 meter separation or that 6 feet between yourself and others is a good method of prevention. But you need to couple this with other things like wearing a mask. If you're not feeling well, stay home. Make sure you're washing your hands and using hand sanitizer frequently. If you operate a business, cleaning and disinfecting the high touch surfaces, so things like your interact payment pads or door handles for customers coming in and out of your premise, that's really important as well. If you can minimize contacts with those from outside of your home, that helps. That helps reduce the number of contacts that you can potentially spread the virus to. And we know that good ventilation helps reduce the transmission of COVID-19. And of course, it's exciting. We are in the process of vaccine rollout. And when you can get your vaccine, when you're eligible, please do so. So I'm going to turn it over to Janet at this point. Thanks, Janet.
Great. I'm happy to talk to you today about the reopening plan. In fact, it was actually just released on Thursday, and the province released a three-step plan to dictate how they will reopen the province slowly with increment measures as we move through the vaccination of our population. So there is a three-step plan in place. And presently, as of today, we are still in the shutdown mode, but beginning potentially the week of June 14th, we will move into step one. These steps are tied to the provincial vaccination rates, as well as key health indicators like our hospital system capacity, our public health system capacity, and how our cases and positivity is shaping up. So that was just released this past Thursday, and that will guide the reopening plan. As you can see here, there's a little more detail on each step. It is a new plan, so I do invite everybody to take a look at this plan. There is a link at the end in the resources slide. And so each step will gradually reopen additional sectors based on the level of transmission that is happening and what the government feels might be safer for us to do at that time. So step one will be the first step that we move into. And as you know, that will allow a little more outdoor retail and a little more outdoor restaurant activity. So that is the purpose of our presentation today, is to get you ready for the reopening of Ontario, which will occur sometime around the week of June 14th, and that's based on the trends that we're observing now. As you know, the Reopening of Ontario Act is the act that's dictating all of our COVID-19 measures, and there also are regulations in play that dictate the specific requirements for each sector. So it is your job as a owner and operator of a business to comply with the orders in force under the Reopening Ontario Act. And each phase of the reopening plan that the Ontario government released on Thursday is tied to a regulation. So it'll be a requirement for you to go in and look at the regulation and look at all the components that will be required for your business. There are general requirements for all businesses, and then there's specific requirements for each sector. So you'll have to pay attention to both of those. In as well, each medical officer of health and each public health unit region may have additional orders or instructions and recommendations that they have in play for their region. So that a medical officer of health may require additional requirements depending on the context and scenario of COVID-19 in that region. So it will be important to be aware of the orders, instructions, and recommendations that we have in play. We do have a page on our website. We've also linked it in the resource pages in this presentation. And so each business and organization will be required to be in compliance with the most restrictive measure. So make sure you check that page regularly because we do add new instructions and orders depending on the context of our COVID-19 situation locally. Okay, so I wanted to point out that, as I mentioned, the regulations do cover off general requirements for every business and organization. We have decided to break that out into two presentations. So the general requirements that every business and organization should cover off is available in a webinar titled General COVID-19 Measures for Businesses and Organizations. And that's a video that you would have received a link to in your package of information. So our recommendation is that you watch that video to learn about safety plans, screening, physical distancing, non-medical masks, personal protective equipment for you and your staff, the cleaning and disinfection measures, and hand hygiene measures. That's a requirement for every business and organization. So that will be covered off in that webinar. The purpose of this webinar will be to cover off the public health recommendations and guidance for businesses in the downtown. And there are specific requirements for downtown businesses this year in light of physical distancing requirements and the expansion of outdoor seating areas and retail areas that the city has been working on. So this will cover off the downtown components for your protocols and COVID-19 plan this year for the warmer summer months. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is physical distancing. So as Julie mentioned, physical distancing of 2 meters or 6 feet, it is one of the most effective prevention methods against COVID-19. So physical distancing needs to be implemented in everything that we do. And then the other measures layered on top. We need a multi-layered approach to preventing COVID-19, but physical distancing must be in that plan. So you must be able to provide physical distancing for your workers, but as well as the members of the general public. So that will be a requirement to set up your business in the indoor premise as well as the outdoor area of your premise if you are doing an outdoor expanded retail or patio to ensure physical distancing. So for example, with restaurants, your tables must all be set up to have 2 meters distancing apart. So this year with the downtown plan, we are for the most part on most streets, the sidewalks will remain open for pedestrian travel. And since the sidewalks are the way that everyone will get to your business, whether they travel by car and they park and they have to enter on the sidewalk or they walk or they bike, everybody needs to use the sidewalk, which means we need to keep the sidewalk open and accessible for everyone to access your business. And we need to make sure that the sidewalk is as safe as possible so people feel safe all the way up to the point of entering your business. So that means we need to keep the sidewalks open for physical distancing this year. We know that there will be lots of pedestrian activity in the downtown, and we have signage reinforcing physical distancing requirements. But to ensure that two-way pedestrian travel can still be maintained this year, we are asking that you keep all the sidewalks open. So that means Sandwich boards, bistro tables, clothing racks cannot be used in the sidewalk this year. But that will be so that we can ensure the pedestrians have the safest experience possible for two-way pedestrian travel along the sidewalk. If your business is using the on-street parking zone for that for expanded retail or expanded patio, it must be left clear for pedestrians to pass through, and of course for your staff to get across to deliver their food, the food to that expanded patio space. So we need to make sure that bags or purses are not left in the sidewalk area. If they're sitting on a table that comes close to the sidewalk area, we need to make sure that there's signage to ensure that it's kept open, that people are not gathering on the sidewalk if they see somebody they know in the patio area. The sidewalk needs to remain open. The other caveat to this is that lineups on the sidewalk will not be permitted, as it will then take away from the physical distancing space for pedestrians. So a reservation system will be required, so that people can come at the time of their reservation and be let right into the patio, and they won't have to line up on the sidewalk. Music. I know that it is summertime, and patios usually signals a time for music. And however, it's important to flag that there are requirements in the orders in force under the Reopening Ontario Act about music. There are restrictions to music. As I'm sure you can imagine, music does, if the volume is high, it does require people around that music to talk loudly or potentially yell, but that is considered for the forceful exhalation that Julie had discussed previously, and that does increase the risk of transmission. So that is why the province has provided in those regulations some specific requirements for music. So the other thing too is if you are an operator of a restaurant, you will typically have your patrons unmasked while they're eating or drinking. And so if there's lots of music and people are talking very loudly and they're not wearing their mask, that also increases the risk of transmission. So we have to be very cautious with music. And the regulations apply to music if you're just playing it over the radio, or live music. Live music must follow the protocols in the regulations as well. And then there's also some additional safety measures that you'll see under live music and performances, that they must that you must are sure are in place. For example, singers or performances of brass or wind instruments must be separated from every other person by a plexiglass or an impermeable barrier. You ensure that the performers are able to maintain 2 meters physical distancing from every other person, and there must be equipment. If equipment is used between members of the public or the band, it must be cleaned and disinfected between each use. We also want to flag that in the downtown core, particularly, live music hosted by an establishment is only permitted to take place within the boundaries of your establishment. And that would include that outdoor expanded area, but it cannot take place on the sidewalk. Again, the sidewalk needs to be open for 2 meter physical distancing of our two-way pedestrian travel. Over to you, Julie, to discuss food safety.
Great. Thanks so much, Janet. So, just as a reminder to our food premises, all the requirements of the food premises regulation still continue to apply in addition to your COVID protocols. So, luckily, a lot of them align: the cleaning, the sanitizing, your personal hygiene, hand washing. So, all of those are requirements of the food premises and your COVID requirements, but they are the ones that remain exceptionally important right now. Food premises are an interesting environment because you are working with people who are not masked, and you're typically working in close contact with people. So you definitely have some increased risk there, and we do want you all to be protected. Um, we need certified food handlers on site while the food premises is open during each hour. Unfortunately, even though we've had to suspend our food handler training and certification program due to our COVID response, there are lots of options available online. So if you go to our website, you can definitely find some of those online options or speak with your public health inspector and they can inform you what some of those other options are. As Janet earlier said, tables and chairs, they must be suitably spaced so that 2 meters can be maintained between patrons. And your tables and chairs have to be constructed of materials that can be cleaned and sanitized. So non-porous, non-permeable, easily cleanable and sanitized. If they're not constructed of such materials, they can be covered appropriately. So something, again, that is non-porous. So for instance, if you are using a picnic table, you can cover the top of the picnic table so that you can clean and sanitize it, as well as the benches. They have to be cleaned and sanitized as well because they are touch points. So there are certain paints that you might be able to use, or using cloth covers as well, the vinyl type. There's a great document available. It's the Restaurant and Food Services Health and Safety during COVID-19. It provides a lot more information on protection of yourself and your staff and your patrons while you are operating under COVID-19 measures. So I encourage you to check that out as well. And please also keep in mind the requirements of the Smoke Free Ontario Act. In addition to our public health inspectors being out in the downtown core, we do have a tobacco enforcement officer who does enforce the Smoke Free Ontario Act. And primarily what you need to know while we enter the outdoor dining, hopefully around June 14th. That's what we're expecting right now, but smoking is prohibited on all patio and outdoor seating areas, as well as within 9 meter radius of the patio. And that's from the perimeter of the patio. So that creates a relatively large smoke-free area. Your patios, if you are creating one, have to be appropriately signed. So even in your permitted retail or patio space, you are going to need to make sure that you have the appropriate signage. You cannot have any ashtrays or cigarette butt disposal areas. Everything has to remain smoke and vape free. If you require signage, you can contact our office or you can download at the link available there. So we thank you for protecting our community, not only against COVID, but also against the exposure to secondhand smoke. That's really appreciated. And finally, I'm not sure I ever thought I'd be talking about this, but dogs on patios. Recently, the food premises regulation was amended to allow dogs on patios. As a dog owner myself, this is really interesting. And I think it's something that we will be pursuing at some point. There are requirements for a premises who is going to allow dogs on patios to have policies and procedures, appropriate signage, and those types of things. However, in the downtown core for the 2021 season, part of the conditions of your permit will be that you won't be able to allow dogs on patios. This is in order to help us maximize the space available for physical distancing. That being said, this does not apply to service animals. If somebody has a service animal, that is still permitted to remain with the individual. So we are here to help. We know this is a lot of information to take in, so take some time and process it. If you have additional questions, you can contact our office, 743-1000, or you can email environmentalhealth@peterboroughpublichealth.ca. But just note that we still are receiving a lot of inquiries and a lot of complaints on a daily basis. So we do have to prioritize what comes in. We are striving to get back to everybody, and we would love to have one-on-one conversations with each and every one of you, but we do have to prioritize what comes in. So you may not hear back from us as quick as you'd like. We can't approve safety plans. We can definitely answer certain questions about them, but we can't approve them, and we also cannot provide legal interpretations of the legislation. So definitely talk to your own legal counsel for that. But if you have implementation questions at your business, that's a good time to reach out to us and to try to talk to your local public health inspector. So we've gone through a lot of information, but there are a lot of resources available out there for you. So the next 4 slides, I believe, are just lists of resources, and we've done it in a way that you can either write down the URL, or the text is there for what you can plug into your search engine in order to pull up the appropriate document. So I'm just going to go through the next 4 slides and just spend about 8 seconds on each slide so that you can jot down furiously. As I said, there's so much information available for you out there, and again, always use us as a resource. So, Janet, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think that's it. Just thank you, everyone, for all that you're doing to help our local response to COVID-19.
I echo that. Thanks so much. Hang in there, and let's hope for a really great summer ahead. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.